Senator's endorsement program. It's been an exciting year so far. I know that the caucus season has just come to a wrap. It's an exciting time. Remember that there is still time to apply as an add-on delegate to the convention. So if you're eligible to do so, I do encourage that. We need as many progressives as we can inside of the Democratic convention. Um, as you mosey your way in, as we let people into the room, I hope that you will introduce yourselves in the chat. That way we can welcome you. So it's a great night. We're going to have a series of questions for our guests, Senator Sonia Chang Diaz. And it will be an exciting night. Of course, you can put your questions in the chat if you have any, if you weren't able to fill out the thing in advance. And yeah, so who's joining us tonight? I see a lot of people. I see David Greenberg. I'm just picking randomly from the list. Robin's here. Liz Reardon, welcome to. So nice to see you. Larry, it's good to see you. So yeah, if you could say what part of the state you're from, that would be great. Pamela from Greenfield. I'm right near Greenfield. It's nice to see people from that part of the state. I know Judith's here. It's nice to see you. Harold, Arlington. I love Arlington. Arlington's a nice place. Cambridge, Altman, and my trackpad's very sensitive. So yeah, like I was saying, if you haven't had the opportunity to put your question in the chat, feel free, or submit a question through the Google form, please feel free to put it in the chat. Very excited for tonight. While people make their way in, I will introduce Chris Spears from Our Revolution Blue Hills to give our invocation. Take it away.
Thank you, Haley. We recognize that we meet this evening on lands taken from Indigenous people. We recognize that we live within the American capitalist system founded on slavery, a system that established a legacy of violence and selfish acquisition that includes mass shootings, racism, sexism, homophobia, support of oppressive foreign governments, and economic inequality. We stand with the working class and their rights to dignity, a living wage, and competitive benefits. Through forums like this one, we endeavor to educate the public on these complex issues by finding constructive solutions regarding a new way forward.
Thank you so much. That was a very beautiful invocation, Chris. Thank you. So before we get started with the event, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows ORMA can't educate people about our endorsed candidates and advocate on issues without your participation. We run on the efforts of volunteers and contributions of donors. Take a moment to volunteer or make a donation, please. Links are being posted in the chat. We can't do any of the wonderful work without your help. It is always amazing when people come and they help volunteer. This is how we get our work done. It's a grassroots movement. Our revolution is a very uniquely grassroots, and that's why I love it so much, and I hope that you will join us in our fight for our candidates who will be endorsing for this upcoming election, and for the legislation that we support in between the elections. That way we're always working within our communities to help make a difference. With that being said, I have the honor of introducing our guests tonight. Senator Sonia Chang Diaz is the daughter of a social worker and America's first Latino astronaut, Frank Chang Diaz. She became the Commonwealth's first Latina state senator when she was elected in 2008. She quickly became the driving force behind many of the state's biggest progressive reforms, including a landmark $1.5 billion progressive education funding reform, a criminal justice reform, LGBTQ equal rights, and changes changes in police accountability. Now Sonia is running for governor of Massachusetts, where she wants to continue her fight for bold, transformational change and build a future we all want our kids to grow up in. Welcome, Sonia. Please begin with your opening statement. You will have 2 minutes, and at the end, and at the close, another 2 minutes to wrap up. Thank you.
Gotcha. Thank you, Haley. It's good to be with you guys tonight. I already have I'm having a little chuckle because it looks like you went way back in the files for that photo, which puts a little smile on my heart to see. That photo was from the election night of the very first election that I ever won. It was an upset victory, and we're going to do it again this year. So for folks who don't know me, I see a lot of, friendly faces here in the Zoom, but for folks who don't know me, I am Sonia Chang Diaz. I am a mom. You might hear the strains of my kiddos in the other room at any time. Everybody keep your fingers crossed for no disasters. I am also a former public school teacher, and I'm Massachusetts' first Latina and first Asian American state senator. And I am running for governor because every day it is getting harder and harder for families to live here in Massachusetts, right? I look around, you look around, it's not difficult to discern this. And over the past 13 years, I have been fighting like hell alongside many of you to address the biggest challenges that we face as a state. And we have one bit, right? $1.5 billion of progressive education funding for our kids' schools, criminal justice reform, police accountability, LGBTQ rights. But in the course of this work, I have also seen firsthand that we have still got too many people in government who are more concerned with holding on to their power rather than doing something with it. But my friends, it does not have to be this way. And I think, a few groups know that better than our revolution, right? You know the power of organizing. And with that strategy, we can deliver debt-free, quality education to every kid in Massachusetts from birth into adulthood. We could pass a Green New Deal in our state to win the fight against climate change and create tens of thousands of new, good-paying, family-sustaining jobs. And we can solve our housing crisis and close the racial wealth divide. All we need to do to achieve these things is we got to stand together. We got to see each other's fights as our own. And we got to elect a governor who does not just say the right words, but who has shown that she will take on our toughest fights, even when it is not politically convenient. And that is why I'm asking for your support as an organization and as individuals. And I want to ask you to sign up to join our team at soniachangdiaz.com. I'll ask many times tonight. We'll post the links in the chat because I am at heart a grassroots organizer, and that is how we build this people power movement. So thank you so much for having me tonight, and I am looking forward to digging into the conversation.
Thank you so much. I would like to introduce to you our helpers this evening. Helping us with getting questions from you to the senator are Robin Bergman of OR Arlington, who's working behind the scenes, and Judy Conrad of Greater New Bedford, and MJ Pierce of the LGBTQ caucus, who will present the questions. There on the slide, you can see all of their amazing faces. So Sonia, to allow us to pose as many questions as possible, we ask that you limit your answers to 3 minutes. Here with the first question from OR members is Judy Conrad.
I am, by the way, from Fall River and not New Bedford, but it's not that important. I like New Bedford too. The first question is, do you support single-payer health care and student debt relief?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, I do. And Judy, it's good to see you again. Really enjoy my time with you in Fall River. And it's good to see you digitally here again tonight. I'm a out and proud supporter of single-payer healthcare. I will tell you guys, as well as student debt relief. So remind me to come back to that if I have time in my 3 minutes. But I'll tell you guys the story that I have told many folks on the campaign trail about single payer. My grandfather, who was the sort of center of our family until he passed away. He was a rural doctor in Montana for decades and a lifelong small government Republican. And I asked him once with some trepidation, Grandpa, what do you think we need to do to fix our healthcare system? And he said, I don't see any other way to do it and how to get the greed out of healthcare where it surely does not belong other than single payer. And I think we've got real hope, right? If we can convince my small government Republican grandpa, then we can surely convince the rest of the voters of Massachusetts who are not already there. And of course, as you well know, there are many who are already, avidly there and helped bring me to the light on this position. So, proud supporter. And on student debt relief, one of the tenets of my education plan, which you can find on the website, is debt-free access to public higher education in Massachusetts. So we need to both, pursue debt relief, working with our federal delegation for folks who are carrying that debt load already, but we also need to stop digging, right? And make sure that we are not adding more and more debt load to students now and in the future here in Massachusetts.
Thank you. MJ.
Hello. So I have here a question from Ann Tate, who asks, what will you do to make Massachusetts a leader on combating climate change?
You said the question was from Ann?
Yes.
All right, Ann, thank you for the great question. Look, this is an issue that I hear about, and I'm glad to say that I do hear about it far and wide, and most especially from young people on the campaign trail. At campaign events, almost always it is a young person, or honestly also, sort of both ends of the age spectrum, right? A young person or an older person who sees, the impacts of this for their grandchildren, who asks the question, what are you going to do to move us faster, harder, and with more urgency on climate change? I was very proud to vote for the Next Generation Climate Roadmap bill in the legislature, which set, clear benchmarks and deadlines for us to transition to 100% carbon-free energy systems and economy in Massachusetts by 2050. But I believe that we can and must go faster than that in Massachusetts. And I have laid out a full-scale Green New Deal plan. Again, you can find it on the website in all of its detail, more than we can cover here. But we do need to go faster and harder toward that transition to 100% clean energy economy, because climate change is an existential threat, right, to all of us. The science is screaming at us, and it's not just something that is around the corner. It is upon us, right? We already have record rainfall, record heat, some of the highest concentrations of affordable housing in floodplains in all of the United States, in Massachusetts. So we are feeling this right now. And so we need to act right now, not push it off into someone else's, watch. So that is why I've set clear deadlines for meeting all of our energy needs, our electricity needs in Massachusetts with clean energy by 2030, by transitioning to all of our new construction in Massachusetts to be green buildings by 2030, and all of our existing building stock to green buildings by 2045, for expanding and electrifying our public transit systems, going fare-free on our MBTA and Regional Transit Authority buses in my first budget cycle. I've made that commitment that you will see the funding for that in my first budget cycle, and that I will lead the charge to identify additional revenue streams to make all of our MBTA fare-free, so that we are marshaling all of our residents to the work of making this climate transition in Massachusetts, because we do need all of our people to participate in that. And part of it is recognizing that public transportation is a public good. And then lastly, I don't know where I am on the clock, but I say we have to make sure that we are grabbing the economic benefits that are right in front of us, right, that for our state of transitioning to green energy, and making sure that the communities of color, the working people, the immigrant communities that have been first in line for the impacts of environmental degradation and extreme weather are first in line for the job growth and the wealth creation that we stand to gain as a state from all of the economic activity of a green energy economy.
Thank you. Judith?
Yes, one of our people who is on the call now brought up very quickly, for me, the most important thing is ending homelessness. I think it is so inhuman. We know we can do it. Look at Boston. We need someone who will just do it now. How would you address this issue?
So there's multiple things that we need to do, right? There's no one solution that is going to end homelessness. Fortunately, in Massachusetts, we have a lot of smart people. You guys have heard me talk sometimes about my dad, who was an astronaut, and I always, sort of put it in perspective. If we can put a person on the moon, we can solve we can solve homelessness, right? And so for starters, right, in the most immediate term, we need to increase our availability of low threshold housing options so that we can get people, just for starters, stably housed off the street, safe from, the freezing cold, days and nights here in the winter. People are not going to get, into the recovery pipeline and be able to access wraparound services if they are not stable and safe to begin with, right? So low threshold housing that gets people on that pathway. And that's something that I have been an advocate for in the state budget, in my own district. You mentioned Boston, right? We are making progress finally here. And we need to expand those offerings statewide so that they're not all just in, one place. And then people who are, suffering from homelessness, addiction, mental health illnesses in other parts of the state can't access those services. And then we need to go upstream, right? Because we don't want to just wait until people are showing up on our streets, suffering from addiction, substance use disorder, suffering from dual diagnosis, mental health issues, until we see them, right? And acknowledge that we're there, or if they're showing up in our emergency room systems, in our prison and policing systems. We've got to go upstream, make sure that we are building adequate affordable housing in our state, make sure that we are doing economic development that really benefits folks at all points on the economic spectrum, and not just, the sort of the high end, glamorous biotech industry. And that starts, at its earliest, right, far, far upstream when you get back to our education system. When we leave these massive cavernous wealth divides in place that start at the earliest ages, the tenderest ages, right, of, 3 and 4 year olds, they enter kindergarten with already vast disparities. That ripples through their little lives and into, higher education, where we see the debt load mounting, and, and on and on. And so we have to do the immediate solutions, but we also need to go upstream if we're really serious about solving homelessness.
Thank you.
And actually, do I have time to add one more thing?
Yes.
The workforce is also a huge part of the solution here. We don't have enough service providers to meet the need. For, once you get folks into those low threshold housings, to provide all those wraparound services, to provide the substance use treatment services, to staff the low threshold shelters. And so part of the solution to that problem, again, I'm going to go back to debt-free access to public higher education, right? Because many of these professions, the mental behavioral health professions, require some credentialing. To be, able and qualified to provide those wraparound services. We have to bring down the cost of entry into those professions, because the pay, of course, is low. And when you have these high debt loads and low pay, not enough people are going to be enticed to go into those professions. So we need to bring down the cost of entry into those lines of work. We need to make the pay actually, living and family sustaining wages. And that's how we will get more workforce that's ready and willing to do this important work.
Thank you.
I have a question from David Greenberg, who asks, the utility companies have an inherent conflict of interest when it comes to supporting the move towards decarbonization. Eversource wants to build a new pipeline in Western Mass. They wanted to charge $10,000 so I could install batteries in my home. They're only interested in profits for their stakeholders. Would you consider buying out the utility companies?
So, I would consider it. I want to be honest and frank with you guys that it is not a concept, a proposal that I have given enough thought and due diligence on that I can, say crisply, yes, no, I would do that, or I wouldn't do that. But look, I am intellectually curious, and I'm highly motivated to solve these problems. So sure, I would consider it. But I can say for sure, right, some the other things that I can say yes to, right, that I have done my homework on, that we do need to press the utility companies on, and we do have, too cozy of a relationship between our current administration and the utilities. So for starters, right out of the gates, in my first days as governor, I pledge to you that I will be appointing people, right, to the regulatory positions, right, at the DPU, that have oversight over the utility companies, who give a damn about the mission and the mandate of making that urgent transition to a green energy state, to a green energy economy, and that are going to run towards those solutions rather than slow walking them. And this means very practical things like in the Mass Save program, right, which we all pay into with our ratepayer dollars. Stopping using our ratepayer dollars to subsidize the installation of new fossil fuel infrastructure in the homes of Bay Staters, right, which is happening today with your and my ratepayer dollars. So we need a DPU that is going to push hard to change those regulations and push Mass Save to go more aggressively, stop subsidizing fossil fuel systems. We need to stop, whenever the state has a permitting decision, an approval decision to make over new fossil fuel infrastructure, using the full weight of the executive branch to stop building new fossil fuel infrastructure. Because again, when you are in a hole, the first thing you have to do is stop digging and hasten that transition. I'm also really encouraged by some promising new technology and legislation that exists already to push and entice and even allow, right, the utilities. Like right now, they actually legally aren't allowed to do this, to allow utilities to find other ways to deliver heat to our homes besides gas, right, besides natural gas. And to allow them to explore the option of network geothermal heat. Is a really interesting, promising new technology that we could start putting our infrastructure dollars into, rather than putting those dollars into repairing old gas lines that are not serving our climate change goals that we have already set out.
Thank you. Judy?
Okay, well, we seem to have another question about fuels. The legislature has declined to consider suspending the gas tax when the price of gas goes above $4. One argument for suspending the gas tax is that it incentivizes the legislature to look for non-gas tax funding sources for transportation infrastructure as we transition away from fossil fuels. What do you think about that argument?
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the question correctly. The question is saying the argument for suspending the gas tax. I'm sorry, Judy, can you say it one more time?
The argument for suspending the gas tax is that it incentivizes the legislature to look for non-gas tax funding sources for transportation infrastructure. Lots of big words here. As we transition away from fossil fuels.
Okay, I think I understand. So I do not support suspending the gas tax. And that may not be the answer that the questioner is looking for, but I'm gonna be straight with you. I don't support it. I think that it is, we do need to, again, move with haste and urgency to identify alternative funding sources for our infrastructure. But look, I have said before, and I will say it here and I'll say it again, right, that we need to put a price on carbon. That is a key, it is a key tactic in the transition to a fully carbon-free economy. And we do need to have these funding streams in that transition period. And they will be waning, right? If we do this work right, it's true that they will be waning. But we need those the upfront resources to invest in the green energy technology and infrastructure. So, part of that, right, the gas tax is an existing version of a price on carbon. It's not a sufficient one. But I don't think we should do away with it, because we do need to make those front end investments to finance the transition. And also, I think we have to one of the other arguments for suspending the gas tax is, that to ease the burden of inflation, particularly in gas prices, on low income people and working people. But the reality is the benefit that suspending or removing the gas tax would provide for low-income consumers is very small. And really, we have to be clear-eyed about, making life easy and comfortable and cushiony for fossil fuel companies that have been jacking up prices, during a global health pandemic, and now during, international humanitarian crisis and war in Ukraine. And that we need to call out the fossil fuel companies for this kind of exploitive behavior, and not just cannibalize the public sector's ability to finance the transition to green energy in order to make life comfortable for fossil fuel companies. So we have to be careful about that. And I think it's I do not support it, even though I know there are folks who may have good intention right around the policy suggestion. I think it is largely a gimmick. It's unfortunate that some leaders are willing to use gimmicks, for making political hay. But I do think it is fundamentally a gimmick.
Thank you. MJ.
I have a question from Butch Black, who asks, how do you plan on dealing with the amount of big money obstruction to progressive issues in the legislature?
Sorry, say it one more time. How do I plan to
how do you plan on dealing with the amount of big money obstruction to progressive issues in the legislature?
Well, look, I would say financing of our political system. People sometimes ask me if there was, one issue that I could wave a magic wand, and change, our public policy on. And if I had to choose one, people usually think I would say education, but it's actually public financing of our elections, because that is foundational to everything else. But I also want to be real with you guys. I don't think that it is simply money that is blocking us from accomplishing a transformational progressive change agenda in Massachusetts. Money is a piece of the puzzle, and that is why you will see issuing from my campaign in the near future, a clear and specific policy about what kinds of campaign contributions we will and will not accept, because I think it is important for all candidates to be accountable to you, the voters, in that way, and be clear with you about where we're willing to take money from. But what I have seen in my 13 years in the state legislature is that it's not just money. I think that we are enormously limited right now in our political culture on Beacon Hill by fear of difficult conversations, right? And fear of controversy. And, sometimes that's, fear of having difficult conversations with well-moneyed interests. But sometimes it's timidity about having difficult conversations within our own democratic family, right? Within the halls of power themselves in the State House. And, I have shown, a willingness throughout my 13 years in office. I will work with anyone, right? I will rock with you no matter what party you are, what side of the aisle you are on, if you are here to get stuff done for working families. And that was true during the Student Opportunity Act. We had bipartisan co-sponsorship and active partnership from some of my colleagues across the aisle. But I will also stand up and speak truth to anybody who is standing in the way and obstructing that change. And it doesn't have to be personal. It doesn't have to be ugly. It's fact-based, and it's always inviting people to be their best selves and to do what is truly needed for the Commonwealth. But it does, I have shown it time and time again, even at great political cost sometimes, to my career and myself, individually, that I will have those hard conversations and come off of the sidelines, even when it is not politically convenient to do so. That's what I did in 2017 when criminal justice reform, true criminal justice reform that included sentencing reform, was stalling in the legislature after years and years and years of promises. I stood up at the Boston MLK breakfast, and I called out, and inventoried the delays that advocates had been experiencing from Beacon Hill, and called on my colleagues to do better and fulfill their promises. I did the same thing with the Student Opportunity Act, and we got real results because of that willingness to stand on a line, even when it was politically inconvenient, and then go organize in order to push through for success.
Okay, here's a related question somewhat. Comes from Salomon Steen. While it is necessary to spur the legislature to be more productive, the governor has a range of options to advance policy all by herself. What are your priorities for executive policy making?
That is a great question, and I love the way it was framed as a herself. Let's all celebrate that mental shift that we are on the brink of in Massachusetts. So, Yes, it is the case, of course, that there are broad executive powers that the governor can exercise. There are things that I can see right out of the gates that we can do in the climate action space, right? Again, making those appointments to the DPU, the Department of Energy Resources. Also, I would call out policy and implementation in our criminal justice system, our criminal legal system, our carceral system, especially. This is a place where we need to do, deep and real culture change. There is some ugly stuff that is happening in your name and my name, and with our tax dollars in our jail and prison systems. The Boston Globe, brought a lot of this to light with their Spotlight series on the DOC last summer. And very little has changed in the wake of that. We need a governor who is going to appoint folks to the helm of our Department of Corrections, who are deeply committed to culture change, to transparency, with reconceptualizing the mission of the DOC. So it's not one purely, of just punishment, but of preparing the 90 to 95% of people who are behind bars, who are going to return to our communities for that day of reentry in order to serve a true public safety mission. Someone who is, leadership that is committed to redeploying the dollars, right? We have great success here in Massachusetts that we have had declining jail and prison populations for the last several years, in part thanks to that 2018 criminal justice reform law. But as our jail and prison population has been going down, of course, we have seen spending going up, right? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make a lick of sense. So using the executive powers to start transitioning those dollars to better public safety applications, reinvesting in under-resourced and over-policed and over-incarcerated communities. And beyond public safety and criminal justice systems, I'll also say education, public health, housing. There are so many places here where the executive agencies can press forward on their own. Let me also say, lastly, though, that I will not be afraid to use the bully pulpit of the governor's office. So this is not part of the sort of official powers, right, of the executive agencies, but it is a huge part of the toolbox for a governor for driving, a transformational change agenda, and being willing to again articulate the goals. Where do we need to be shooting, and what's the map to get there, right? So when it comes to things like accomplishing a truly universal early education and care system in Massachusetts, that is going to require buy-in from the legislature. You will see me use the full weight of the governor's office to push that in the legislature, right? To articulate the goal, to articulate the roadmap, and then drive us there. Same thing with debt-free access to public higher education. So it's again that combination of using those executive levers and the bully pulpit.
Excellent. MJ.
Yes. I have here a question from Henry, who asks, several cities in the Commonwealth are moving teams that respond to nonviolent emergencies, such as mental health emergencies, out of police departments and into other agencies. Do you favor state legislation that would provide financial support for these initiatives?
Yes, absolutely. And it's easy for me to say yes to, because that legislation I think you're thinking of is probably the ACEs bill. That I am the lead filer of that legislation in the Senate. So absolutely support it. If I can use the balance of my time here just to return to the previous question, is that okay, MJ?
Absolutely.
So I want to give you guys, this is using power and wielding responsibility, when it comes to you, even when those moments might require political discomfort, is, as I have said previously, what you can expect from a Chang Diaz administration. And, whether that's the case in criminal justice work, in the education space, I think this is one of the key differences that you will find between myself and the Attorney General. There have been some instances where the responsibility has fallen to the Attorney General, where she has elected not to use it. And, people have differences of good faith, right? We don't agree on every issue, right? The Attorney General and I don't agree on every issue, and I don't expect that we're going to. There are differences between us on single payer healthcare, right? On expansion of police surveillance powers, on no-knock warrants. But there are also some things that I think are less visible, right? For example, last year, 2 years ago, time is a blur, but during the height of the pandemic, I wrote into law a requirement that the Department of Correction, an oversight office for the Department of Corrections, to ensure that they were following health and safety best practices during the pandemic and implementing a requirement to reduce the prison population. And I got that into law at the height of the pandemic, as the Baker administration had been ignoring court orders to reduce prison crowding. And, it was something about basic safety. It was, this was a matter of basic safety and accountability. But when that office was all set up and ready to go, we had gotten it, put into law. Attorney General Healey refused to appoint someone to run that office, even though the law directed her to. And all she was willing to do was send a recommendation over to the Department of Corrections and then let them handpick and hire someone else to pick the person, to let them pick the person who was supposed to be an independent check on the Department of Corrections. And that, I think, encapsulates an important difference in our approach to the work of governing and to leadership. To meet this moment, to undo systemic racism in our systems, right? Be it criminal legal system, education systems, environmental systems. We need leaders who are going to use every tool at their disposal and use them proactively. And sometimes you're going to have to invent tools that don't exist if there aren't enough tools to get the job done. And that's what I did when I wrote the Oversight Office into law. In that law, we gave Attorney General Healey the ball. And, she likes to talk a lot on the campaign trail about her experiences as a point guard. But when we needed her to take that shot, right, instead she put down the ball and walked off of the court. She abdicated her responsibility. And that is the opposite of what we need in order to undo generations of racism in our criminal legal system. And the same is what we need, that kind of pro-action rather than standing on the sidelines is what we need to undo generations of racism in our education system, in our environmental policy, in our health outcomes. We need a governor who does not just talk about things like racial justice in pretty words, but who is there when the chips are down and the debate is uncomfortable, because that is when people who've been suffering under the status quo for years really need you. And so that, is at the heart of the answer to this question for me about how you can expect me to use the powers of the executive branch, is that kind of pro-action, right? Using every tool at your disposal and then being willing to invent some, when they don't exist in order to get the job done.
Thank you. Judy?
I notice a lovely little question over here. We assume you learned from your father, the astronaut, to look at the big picture all the time, perhaps. But the question from Ty and Jan is, what did your mother as a social worker teach you?
Yes, Ty, thank you so much for this question, because it is, I know that my dad's story does, is sort of more glamorous, gets more play, but my mom's imprint is profound on me personally and in my politics. And I think there are a lot of kids of social workers out there who end up going into community organizing and public policy because it's a really politicizing experience to watch your parent work with under-resourced families, in my mom's case, particularly women and children, year after year after year, and watch those families hit up against the same barriers over and over and over again. And you watch that, and it is only natural to think, there's got to be a more systemic way to solve these problems, right? So that my mom can succeed and the families that she is busting her butt to serve can succeed. And so that is what has pushed me into public policy work and into organizing work. And I will also say on a more personal note that my mom is a woman of profound faith. She raised me Catholic. I hope she doesn't mind that I'm, getting personal here with her, that she actually has, moved on to a different congregation because I think that, some of the shortcomings of the Catholic hierarchy became too much for her. But something that really speaks to me about the Catholic faith that she raised me in is this idea of faith through works, right? That words and that faith alone are not enough, that you have to make manifest your faith through work. And there's a proverb about this. It's actually an African proverb about when you pray, move your feet. And that is something that deeply animates me and speaks to me. That Ayana talks about policy as her love language. Policy definitely is my love language, but work is also my love language. And so those are my mom's imprints on my politics.
Thank you. MJ.
Yes, we have here a question from our own Solomon Steen again. Over 23,000 MA residents have died from COVID. Our governmental response seems defined by the premature lapse of the eviction moratorium and the non-changes to school ventilation systems. How did Governor Baker fail to lead in this moment, and how would you get the legislature to respond proportionately to emergencies?
MJ, how long we got? I guess 3 minutes is the answer.
3 minutes.
So,
your time begins now.
Look, I want to sort of give fairness where it's due, that being a chief executive in a time of pandemic is an enormously heavy load, right? And no one person can anticipate all of the twists in the road that are going to happen in a global health pandemic. But there was so much about this pandemic that was predictable and was in fact predicted, right? And that is where I think the biggest failings that I see in the Baker-Polito administration's response. And I don't just say this sort of like from the armchair, now, sort of retrospective analysis. These are things that I was sort of, screaming, and banging on the table and then organizing about all throughout the pandemic, right? And that started from like the first week probably of the state of emergency declaration, looking and seeing, look, this is going to be another Hurricane Katrina, right? Where what affects, the community, the state as a whole is going to affect communities of color, immigrant communities, low-income communities, far more severely, and that we've got to get ahead of that. So I was, pushing, pulling, fighting tooth and nail to get that that eviction and foreclosure moratorium in place in the first place through the legislature. Then to make sure that it got extended. And when the governor refused to extend it, and the legislature also, declined to extend it, that we at least, kept pushing to get the mediation requirements in place and to get the requirement in place that if a landlord is refusing to take part in the RAF program, the rental assistance, that the state would provide, that an eviction proceeding could not move forward. So that landlords would have to, engage with these alternatives to keep people in their homes. It's also why I pushed, from very early in the pandemic to make sure that we had rigorous data collection requirements at the state level so that we could have clear sight lines into who is getting sick, who's getting hospitalized, who is dying in this pandemic, by race and ethnicity, by region, and by occupation, right? Something that this administration has never been in compliance with, collecting that data since day one of signing it into the law. So those are failings that I've seen. It has taken way too much pushing, shoving, cajoling to get the administration to pay attention to vaccine equity. We have gotten them to take some steps, but it has been, at this kind of shoving every step of the way, rather than being there proactively in order to say to communities that have been hardest hit, what else can I do? What else can I do to help? How else can we close these gaps? And that is, again, what you could expect from a Chang Diaz administration, is that proactive partnership, right? Not just putting the vaccines in a pile over here and saying, well, if you want them, come over here. Never mind that you don't have internet access, transportation, ability to get time off from work, or, speak the language in which all of these materials are provided. So you don't just put them in a pile and say, go over there if you want them. You don't just stand at a podium and say, hey, everybody get vaccinated, and then walk away. You have to be a proactive partner with families, municipalities, businesses, who are out there inventing the wheel 1,000 times over, to try and deal with the pandemic. So that was a lot of sort of what I would have done differently. I know there was a second part of the question. I forgot what it was.
The second part of the question was, Well, it ended. How did Governor Baker fail to lead in this moment, and how would you get the legislature to respond proportionally to emergencies like this?
Yeah. Well, again, I mean, I think in, having the bully pulpit of the governor's office in a time of crisis is a big part of how you, engage the legislature to respond appropriately. I think that if an executive leader had stood up and said, here are the things that we need to do to pursue equity, right? Equity in data, equity in, pro-action with getting vaccines out to communities, equity in, all the social safety net response, that there would have been actually a lot of responsiveness from the legislature. I do believe that. Going forward, something that we do need to continue to keep an eye on. We don't know everything that this pandemic has in store. We have to keep an active eye on the data. It is wonderful. I know we all, myself included, are relieved to be finally having some return to normalcy. But COVID is going to continue to be with us, and it is going to continue to drag at low-income communities, communities of color, immigrant communities, with lower vaccination rates, as long as we just let that be the status quo. And so we have to not take our foot off the gas, and we have to not just let ourselves sort of comfortably turn away and pretend that we don't see that, because the rest of us are able to go back to life as normal, or else COVID is going to become another asthma or another diabetes, right? Where we just have these chronic disparities that are hugely costly in human terms and in financial terms, and in learning loss and in wage loss for the communities that can at least afford those things.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Next question from Judy.
Hi, I've got a nice little question here. ORMA has a group called the Green New Deal Climate Change Group, and they're tree huggers. They acted actively to stop Boston from chopping down all the trees on Melnia Boulevard when they started to wanted to enlarge it, and now they're building a new park called the Malcolm X Park in Boston, and they want to chop down 58 trees and 54 mature trees, some of them over 100 years old, and our Green New Deal climate group does not want them to chop them down unless they're about to fall down and hit somebody or something like that. How do you feel about saving trees?
I feel good about saving trees, and I don't just say that, sort of because it's the right answer, right, or the convenient answer now. I was right there with the Friends of the Melnia Boulevard, right, when they were just standing on the line to prevent the loss of those 100 mature trees on Melnia Boulevard, when it was not a foregone conclusion, that they would win. And state and city government, we're ready there with the plans to take those trees down. And this is a great example, right, of the power of organizing and persistence. That, for several years, the Friends of Melnia Boulevard were doing battle there to save those trees. And in the end, they won. And those trees are going to remain. So, and I was proud to stand with them in that fight. And one of the things that you will find in my on my issues page on the website is a commitment to reforestation, to municipal reforestation across our Commonwealth, particularly in the communities in Massachusetts where we have heat islands, right, and insufficient, just huge disparities in tree canopy between have and have not communities, right? And it's bad for what's the word I'm looking for? Not mitigation. You guys, I'm having a total block on the right word. Resiliency, thank you, for resiliency against extreme weather in terms of, preventing and mitigating against heat waves. Also important for air quality, right? We've seen with COVID how important, air quality is just during regular times, and then even more so when we have something like a respiratory disease pandemic, right, that rips through our communities. So there's just so many benefits, right, from making sure that we're doing that reforestation work.
I have here a question on climate from Mark Doherty. He says, "Good evening, Senator. While I'm strongly in favor of your environmental justice policies, how do you plan on implementing ambitious goals like a 100% carbon-free electric grid in the state in 8 years? I noticed that you say you will have a Green New Deal in Massachusetts passed, but how will you work with the state legislature to make this a reality?"
Great question. And I appreciate the drive for specifics. Was it Mark who asked that question?
Yes, it was.
And you should press all candidates for specifics. I want to highlight that I am the only candidate in this race who has put forth any kind of specific plans about how my administration will combat climate change and transition to a green energy economy, and on what timeline we will do that. Yes, 2030 is soon. But it is possible. I'm convinced after deep discussion with a lot of experts in this field, we have the technology. We are very blessed in Massachusetts, where we sit geographically. We are right next to, on our coastline, what many people refer to as the Saudi Arabia of offshore wind. We have enough potential with offshore wind alone to meet our electricity consumption needs in Massachusetts 19 times over, right? So we need to make sure that we are developing that capacity, that we are upgrading our grid to be able to do the interconnection, to get those new energy sources online, onto the grid. But the capacity is there, and we shouldn't do it with just wind energy alone, right? We need to have a diversified portfolio, but that's just an example of how much capacity is there, right? And how much potential is there. And we need to get the development up to speed with the potential. We can also do more with solar, both rooftop solar and larger scale solar developments. I've been pushing for years for a community solar equity bill, so that nonprofits, churches, CDCs can get the same reimbursement rate for solar energy that they generate as I get with the solar panels on my house. It's outrageous to me that I get the full retail rate for the solar energy that I generate on my rooftop, but that a nonprofit down the street or a church down the street that has community subscribers, maybe renters, who want to subscribe into that energy generation, cannot tap into that benefit. And it's at cross purposes with our climate goals, of course, as a state. So we need to do more with solar. As I mentioned earlier, network geothermal, I think is really promising technology that we need to hasten, our progress towards. So we have a lot of options here in Massachusetts. We have to pick them up and use them.
Thank you, Sonia. That was very thorough.
Are we getting to the time for the closing statement, or do we have time for one more?
Can I get one more little tack on?
Sonia, that's up to you. Do you want one or two more questions?
How are we doing on? I gotta do some tag into some mom duty, so I should probably cut myself off. I'm just gonna make one little tack on, if it's okay, to that last.
Of course.
Because you guys are asking for specifics, and I love that. Which is that in addition to developing the physical infrastructure that it's going to require for us to generate, all this clean energy, we need the human infrastructure, and working with the legislature in order to stand up that human infrastructure is what I've already been doing and what I will continue to do as governor. That means things like in this ARPA bill that we just passed to spend out some of the federal recovery money that we've gotten. We dedicated, several $1 million, tens of millions of dollars, in that ARPA bill to physical infrastructure, to physical green energy infrastructure projects. But I made sure we also had to put an amendment in for $7.5 million dedicated to higher ed institutions that primarily serve communities of color, or that disproportionately serve communities of color, to stand up green jobs workforce development programs, so that the workforce is there to design, to build, to maintain all of that concrete and steel physical infrastructure as well, so that again we can make sure that the communities that have been hardest hit by the climate change are also first in line for those jobs and that wealth creation.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us. So would you, first of all, many thanks for taking the time to ask our members questions. Secondly, would you like an additional 2 minutes to have closing remarks and plug your website and ask people to volunteer?
Yes. Shameless plug for the website, SoniaChangDiaz.com. Please sign up to volunteer, to donate. We are a people-powered campaign. More than 70% of our donations are of $100 or less. If you can give more than that, that's great. But give what you can, because every donation is powerful. Sign up to gather nomination signatures with us. I heard someone mention add-on delegates at the beginning. We welcome you also to delegate for the campaign. So, I will just, besides the plug of all the ways to sign up on the website, I want to say, we've covered a lot of ground tonight, and I really appreciate the rigorous questions and that drive towards specificity. We have talked about really big issues that we need to tackle as a Commonwealth. And the change that we need and that we have been told to wait for too long for all of our families and our communities. And I am not going to lie to you guys. Our work to deliver on those changes is not always going to be easy. But I know that this kind of transformational change is in fact possible because I have lived it, right? You can see it in the things that I have helped to build and deliver over the past 13 years. You can see it in the coalition of urban and suburban parents and students and workers and researchers and business leaders who brought together the force that made the Student Opportunity Act possible and its $1.5 billion a year in progressive education funding. You can see it in the outside-in organizing that made true criminal justice reform possible in 2018. You can see it in the police reform bill that protesters called us to in 2020 and that we got done. You can see it in Massachusetts' historic transgender equal rights laws. So I know that these things are possible. The problem is these kinds of wins are still the exception rather than the rule. And I don't know about you guys, although I have a suspicion where you guys are as well, but I am tired of these things being the exception. We have to make audacious root cause problem solving the rule. We are a state that has more millionaires than 46 other states. We for damn sure can pass a millionaire's tax in this state. And we can make universal early education and debt-free higher ed a reality in our state. We are a state that should be leading on voting rights, on health equity, on greening our energy use, as we've talked about, building a 21st century transit system. And like I said, we can close the racial wealth divide in our state. Imagine that. Restore the middle class and make it so that our kids' economic fortunes look better and not worse than their parents. Do not listen to anybody who tells you that this world is not within reach, because it is. When it comes to winning these kinds of changes for Massachusetts, we are not limited by natural resources, right? As I mentioned, we're not limited by technology. We are not even limited by public opinion in Massachusetts. Our biggest obstacle is a lack of courage and urgency from our elected leaders to get off of the sidelines and get into where it's, difficult but transformational. I did not get into this race because I thought it was going to be easy. As you know, I got into it, last summer when Charlie Baker was, still presumably going to run again. And I didn't get into it because I saw a good career opportunity. I got into this race because I have stood on the front lines with families across the state for my whole life. I know the urgency of this moment that we're living in, and I know the future that we can build together. So, OR Massachusetts, if this is the kind of future that you want to grab with both hands, and one that is worth rolling up your sleeves and fighting for, I am asking you to join me and sign up at that website at soniachangdiaz.com. I am excited to build this future with you and partner with you on this growing campaign. So thank you so much for creating this space for us to talk and dig into the issues tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us. As you can see in the chat, there's a great many amount of questions, very good questions that we're unable to ask due to the time limit. And so we will be submitting the questions to the campaign for us to include in our report and an endorsement ballot to our membership. Before we wrap up, I just want to remind everyone that our Revolution Massachusetts run on volunteers and donations. Check the chat for the links to sign up as a volunteer or to make a donation. We need people who want to get out and talk with friends and neighbors about income inequality, ending white supremacy, advancing rights for LGBTQ people, housing as a right, Medicare for all, and lots more. We need people who enjoy writing, people who have technical skills, and people with experience organizing. Right now, we're especially focused on recruiting union members. Check the link and don't forget to make a donation. And once again, thank you all for sharing your questions and spending time with us. You can watch the recorded interview on Facebook and YouTube. You'll also be receiving electronic ballot shortly. And so thank you once again for joining us. Check out the website. Volunteer if you have time, donate if you have the ability to do so. And I look forward to working with all of you in the future. And I hope you all have a great night.